Hi, I'm Gary, and in this shop tip video I'm going to show you how to make router patterns for making repetitive projects, especially for like craft shows and so forth. You can get a same kind of results every time. So stay tuned and I'll show you how I do this. Okay, it's routing with a pattern. First you have your workpiece here. Have a 1-inch straight bit with a top bearing guide on it, and you want to line this cutter up so it covers all the surface of the thickness of the board there. Then you add on your pattern. This is a 1/4 inch thick pattern. As you can see, bearing doesn't cover onto that pattern very well. It's only about halfway or so. Maybe you can take it down a little bit to get more coverage of the bearing on the pattern, but then you're lowering your cutting bit too. So you want to be careful you don't get too low and start missing out on some of your cuts. So that's with a 1/4 inch pattern. Now if you go with the 1/2 inch pattern, you can see you get a lot more coverage and the bearing is completely on the pattern here, and that'll be a lot safer, and you can bring your cutter up a little bit more. Make sure you got complete coverage for thickness of the material that you're going to be cutting out. I'm going to make my patterns out of these and a couple of patterns I traced out here on some draft paper. This board I'm working with here is a 1/2 inch MDF. It's 2 feet wide by 4 feet long. And I use a 1/2 inch because that gives me a better working pattern for using these as patterns at the router table. So I will cut these out at 4 inches wide, trace these patterns on, and then trace them out on the bandsaw. These I will adhere to the pieces that I cut out there in the crossways, so they're each about 12 inches long, and then I'll cut out the patterns for those too. Now, the reason I'm redoing these patterns is because when I did these patterns, I didn't think or something, and mistakenly I cut a 45-degree angle at the bottom of the pattern. That doesn't work well when you're using this pattern for tracing or patterning around on a router table, because this here can create a void and put you off on your pattern. Okay, so here I've set my fence to 5 inches from the blade. I'm going to cut out 5-inch strips. While my pattern's only going to be 4 inches wide, I want to give myself a little bit of room here, so I have some room for error. All you need to do is cut out 2 of these strips. Now I will cut these into 12-inch lengths. Set, move my fence a little bit so I don't have any catch. Okay, for these two patterns here, the wine glass and the wine bottle, I cut out my pattern that I drew and tried to cut the bottom edges very straight so I could line that up with the bottom edge of the board. Then what I did was I held the pattern on, lifted up that, and then I used some of this spray adhesive to spray the board and the underside of this pattern. Let that flip back down, and then kind of did the same with the other end here. Flipped it up, sprayed it with some adhesive, and laid it back down. So I'll let this set up a little bit, then I'll go to my bandsaw and cut these out. Pattern will remain on there, and then I can sand up to the lines to get them good and straight. So on this template, I have this hole that I'm going to make here. It's an 1.5 inch diameter. So I've marked my center for that here. What I need to do is to drill a hole through there that's going to fit my scribe for my particular size, and you may have to do this based on the size and thicknesses, tapers of your particular scribe. What I did is I did some test fitting to get my scribe to fit through and protrude about 1/8 of an inch past this thickness here. Now, this is a cutoff piece from doing one of these patterns. It's a 1/2 inch thick, so that's what I'm testing with, is the same material that my pattern's going to be made out of. I found that a drill bit of 9/64 in my particular case allowed my scribe to protrude a little more than 1/8 of an inch, but it's enough that will make a good mark in the surface where I'm going to mark on my board for finding center for that hole. Then I can line up my hole saw on that when I go to cut that hole. On the template here that I'm going to cut out and make, I'm not going to cut this out at the 1.5 inch diameter. I'm only going to drill the hole in here that's big enough to fit my scribe into to mark the hole on the final workpiece. Okay, so I have my pattern well adhered here to this board, so I'll go ahead and cut out this pattern on my bandsaw. cut this out, cut up close to the pattern lines, but not to the pattern lines exactly. With the sanding on the oscillating sander, I'll be able to finesse this better up to those lines to get a better shape. Okay, so now I'm at my oscillating sander, and I've got my sanding belt on, so it's got a straight surface here for a while. And I'll use that for doing these straighter edges on this pattern here. Then for some of these curved edges here, I'll use this end here because this has a 1.5 inch radius there. So on my workpiece here, or the pattern that I'm making, I've got the center for this hole laid out here, and what I'll do is take my scribe here, detent that and mark it so that my drill bit that I'm drilling through here, which is going to fit the shaft of my scribe, so when I'm marking the hole for the workpiece that I'm making, this will line up correctly. If I were to cut out this hole here and then try and mark that out on the piece that I'm making, when I go to line up the hole saw bit or my circle cutting bit, it's real hard to seem to get right on to that center. So with having a way to mark that will help a lot and get me on point better. Otherwise I seem to be off a little bit if I try and make that big hole. This will help me be a lot more accurate this way. As I said before, put my scribe through, give me about 1/8 of an inch coming through there so I can make a detent on the board that I'm going to be working with. Now for other types of patterns, this might be a technique that you can use. Depends on what you're locating and the holes that you're making, like on the inside of a piece like this. Okay, once you've got your sanding done, now this is a scrap piece left over to show you how to peel this pattern off your workpiece. And I just find an edge and start peeling it up. Kind of slow and easy. Pull that up. Want to make it a little bit easier, you can use a heat gun, and that'll make it come off. That makes it come off a lot easier. Then, what you might find, a little bit of residue from the spray adhesive. What I would do is take a little bit of about 120 grit sandpaper, sand off a bit. Another thing you can do to get this glue off if it's difficult, I have some of these alcohol swabs that you can use. The alcohol is great, better than water, because water kind of soaks and raises up the grain. Whereas the alcohol evaporates pretty quickly, so it's not going to do that so much. These are used a lot by diabetics for when they do their injections, and they're available at the local drugstores and stuff, and you can just use that to wipe the glue off. So you can see that'll dry up pretty quickly, and that leaves a smooth surface with no sticky residue at all. Okay, now that I've got all my patterns cut out, got them sanded up, and I've got the spray adhesive residue removed from these, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to spray these with a couple coats of this clear aerosol lacquer, and that'll protect these because later on at a point I will be adhering these to my stock that I'm working with, my workpiece, with double-sided tape. Now these are MDF, and frankly any kind of wood you can use. When you use double-sided tape, over time it starts pulling some of the wood fibers apart off your pattern. Over a short period of time that can kind of make your pattern not so good anymore. So by spraying these with a couple coats of this clear aerosol lacquer, that'll prolong the life quite a bit for these patterns before I have to make new ones. Okay, so I have completed spraying the clear lacquer on these. I did one coat, then lightly sanded with 220 grit. Then I did two more coats, and then lightly sanded with the 220 grit, so I did another sanding after my third coat. Then I did a fourth final coat, and these come out very smooth, very nice, where it's going to be easy for the double-sided tape to adhere well, but not to pull the wood fibers off as I take the tape off. Now I did both sides of these. so they're both equally the same. Sometimes you can change your patterns out. All of these really, you flip them around, you got the same pattern either way, except for the fish one. That one's going to be a little bit different because of the way the fins are on that. Also, another suggestion, when doing these kind of patterns here, you don't want to do like I did the first time, whereas I cut the 45-degree angle at the bottom here for these bottle balancers. You don't want to do that, because when you're following this pattern along with your pattern bit on the router, once it gets to any voids here like that, that can put your bit off a little bit, and it could create a defect in your finished product. Okay, so I'm going to do a board here to cut out a pattern, and what I'll do is I got a board selected here. It's got the right width for what I'm doing. I happen to be working on some magic bottle balancers here for a craft show. Get my saw blade height up, line up my cut line for approximately. Now, got a clean edge here, a clean edge here. I'm going to put my pattern on here, get it lined up on the bottom, so that's good and square. Use a chunk of blank wood somewhere that's a scrap piece, so I can use that to get the base lined up. Then I just go around and trace this pattern. As you can see that, next I will go to the bandsaw and cut just outside these layout lines, and then I'll attach this pattern onto the board again, go around with the pattern bit to clean the lines up evenly with the pattern shape. Okay, so another step I want to do with this pattern here, because I'm doing these wine bottle balancers, I have to cut a 45-degree angle here at the base of the pattern that I'm going to do. Basically, as with other kinds of patterns and things that you're making, pick your best wood grain side that you want up or to be the face. Then make cuts like this based on that. To get this kind of a cut, I'm going to have to turn my board over here and then go through this. Now for this, I may pass a few times and sneak up on this, get a good diagonal cut. This looks like a pretty sharp edge here. I'll just sand off some of this stuff to make sure I got a good clean edge on that. And yeah, that's a good sharp edge I've got there as it is. So I won't have to sneak up on this one anymore, but in the case that you do need to sneak over a little bit, that's something you just kind of adjust it over just incrementally and get a good sharp edge on it. Okay, so here at the bandsaw, I'm going to cut out this pattern. Stay outside the layout lines. I'm going to turn on all my dust collection, which is going to make a lot of noise. Okay, I've got that cut out pretty well, so I'll put the template back on with double stick tape and then go to the router table and finish it up to shape with the pattern bit. Okay, so my next step here is to adhere this pattern onto my workpiece, and I put a couple of strips of double-sided tape that will hold the pattern in place on there. So let's take those off. I try to carefully position this on here and get everything pretty close to being even. Not absolutely perfect. You can kind of set it on there. If you need to reposition it, you can lift it off, reposition it easily enough, as long as you don't press on it too hard yet. Make sure all the edges are lined up pretty well, so the bottom piece or the work piece overlaps the pattern by a little bit everywhere around it. So got that there. So now all I have to do is press this on. That sticks the pattern on pretty good, so it holds in place, and I can go to the router table, trace around this with the pattern bit, and I'll have a perfect shape. Okay, so on my router table here, I put in a 1-inch pattern bit with the top bearing. That'll follow along the pattern here. And this is the workpiece on the bottom here that will get trimmed to the size of the pattern. And I've adjusted the height on this up and down so to make sure that the cutters are covering the entire surface of the workpiece that I want to trim. So you can see I got a perfect trim out of this pattern. Now I can separate this. Here we go. We'd usually try and separate it by using a putty knife. This works. Now I can pull these off, and that leaves a pretty clean surface on there for me. As I mentioned before, I coated these in a lacquer or varnish to keep the tape from pulling off any wood fibers off my pattern. That way my patterns will last a lot longer. So a little bit of sanding and make the hole, and I'll be all set. Now some of the next steps you may do on your work pieces here after you've got the pattern made is I'll be like going over with about a 1/8 inch or maybe a 1/4 inch round over to round over the edges on these patterns here. That'll make them a lot softer. Part of the finishing touches. Okay, so this is how I make router patterns for making projects that I make repetitiously for like craft shows. So this makes it a lot easier to keep doing a lot of projects. It's easier to use a router pattern versus, sanding all the edges into shape. This gets a lot more accurate and repetitive. As I said, I use a lacquer or varnish on the surfaces here to keep the double-sided tape from tearing up any of the fibers off my patterns here. It'll give them a longer life. So, to wrap this up, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you liked it, please give me a like and share it with your family and friends and your colleagues and other craftspersons. Please subscribe to see what I may come up with next, and be sure to hit that bell icon so you won't miss out on anything. Thank you.